For many people, family is the meaning of life. However, it is extremely difficult to find a partner who will support and become an ideal parent. Unfortunately, falling in love often clouds the mind, so there is a risk to connect your life with a person who can become a real nightmare in reality. In April 2005, the life of Janet Abaroa, a young woman from Durham, North Carolina, was cut short overnight. When she turned 25, she was married, had her first child, and had every chance of a bright future. However, in her short life, she managed to go through many difficulties. In recent years, Janet has focused her efforts on building a reliable family and aspired to become the best mother for her son. Janet was born on June 19, 1979, in a small town in Virginia. The girl became the seventh of the children. Her family was very large and belonged to the Mormons. Religion has occupied a prominent place in the life of each of them since childhood. From an early age, Janet was strong and independent, while remaining friendly and possessed a sharp mind. She loved children very much and always dreamed of becoming a mother. Education was given to her without problems, and she had enough time for sports. In high school, the girl played football, basketball, and took up swimming. In high school and college, she played on local teams, in particular for the University of Southern Virginia. During one of the matches between the students in 1998, Janet met a young football player named Janet Abaroa. He played for the Southern Virginia men's national team. The young people instantly got into each other and fell in love.
Janet Abaroa and Janet Christensen met in college. They were both athletes, both very attractive, and he was smitten by her right away.
Despite her sociability and openness, the girl strictly adhered to the canons of her faith and kept her distance. So the relationship lasted 2 years before the young man offered his beloved his hand and heart. During this period, the girl turned 20, and her chosen one was a year younger. Raven chose a romantic setting for the proposal. It was a secluded place in the park where they often walked. Knowing how important attention to detail is for Janet, he carefully prepared everything for the proposal. He chose a beautiful place, prepared her favorite flowers, and even invited their close friends so that they could share this moment. When Raven got down on one knee and proposed marriage to Janet, she was shocked and happy. His sincere and touching proposal was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. They got married in August 2000. And in order to gain financial independence, they got a job together as sellers in a sporting goods store. However, to do this, they had to move to the city of Durham, located in North Carolina. The young couple began to rent a house in the suburbs and immediately began to work. It seemed that the young people were happily married. Outwardly, they were the perfect couple, as all friends and neighbors talked about. However, as is often the case, they did a lot for the show. Over time, the relationship between Janet and Raven began to deteriorate. Janet, although devoted to her husband, felt that something was wrong. Raven began to be away from home often, his behavior became unpredictable, and quarrels between them arose more often. Janet began to suspect that her husband was not being honest with her. At one particularly tense moment, when the quarrels between Janet and Raven reached a peak, Raven eventually confessed to cheating. This admission was a disaster for Janet. He informed her that he had been having an intimate relationship with another woman for the past few months.
But just 3.5 years into their marriage, Raven tells Janet that he's having an affair.
Raven's confession was extremely painful for Janet. She was deeply disappointed and offended that her husband had cheated on her, especially considering that there were already problems in their marriage. Soon, Janet repeatedly complained to her family and friends that Raven was cheating on her with different women. My husband even left home once for a few days, but later returned. She found herself at a real crossroads because she sincerely loved her husband and did not want to divorce him. During this difficult period, Janet found out that she was pregnant. She dreamed of a big family, and everything seemed to be coming true. But against the background of her husband's infidelity, her dreams seemed more and more distant to her. Janet often felt lonely, as she lived far from her family and had practically no friends. During pregnancy, she became close to her neighbors and found several girlfriends among them at once. That's how she got an outlet. Later, her new friends tried to talk to Raven so that he would stop cheating on his pregnant wife. For a while, their words really worked, and the situation in the Abaroa family returned to normal. On October 17, 2004, a boy was born in a young family. He was named Caden. He had his mother's full attention on him. Janet could no longer think of anything but becoming the perfect parent for her child. Now that Janet was completely devoted to motherhood, the young family was experiencing a financial crisis. Raven became the sole breadwinner. But his salesman's salary was sorely lacking for 3 people. The landlord of their house was sympathetic and even granted them a 3-month deferral of rent payment. He went to meet the Abaroa family halfway, as he understood that they had financial difficulties and at first the child would require even more investments. However, despite the support, the young people could not solve all their financial problems. Therefore, they even turned to the local church. They asked for help with money and the young family was helped. In December 2004, the situation became even worse. During this period, the son was only 2 months old and then his father was arrested. He was detained for stealing goods in the very sports goods store where the young man worked with his wife. It turned out that he stole several tracksuits and managed to sell them online. The total damage from his actions amounted to more than $9,000. Of course, the thief was fired. With luck, Raven managed to avoid a prison sentence. He was ordered to pay $10,000 in compensation to the store and was sentenced to 2 years probation. In fact, both parents were left without work and without money with a baby in their arms. Raven could no longer get a normal job with a criminal record. But a young family with a small child still managed to stay afloat. They took on any part-time job to feed their little son and accepted help from their loved ones. So it took several months until the last tragedy occurred in the family. On April 26, 2005, Janet picked up Caden from kindergarten and went home with her son to prepare for dinner. The husband arrived in the evening, had dinner with his family, and then, when his wife and child fell asleep, he went to Mauriceville to participate in a local mini-football match. When the man returned home, he realized that his house had become the scene of a bloody tragedy. Janet was lying in an unnatural position on the floor in a pool of her own blood, showing no signs of life. A small child was lying in his crib next to him and crying. Fortunately, he was not injured. Raven, in a state of shock, immediately called 911. He said that his wife was attacked. She's covered in blood. He can't understand what was done to his wife. Raven assumed she had been shot. When paramedics arrived at the call, they realized that Janet had not been shot, but had been stabbed several times. The young mother died instantly from a neck wound. The place of the massacre also resembled the battle of a part of all its blood. She died in a rented house located in Durham. But the most striking thing was that Janet was pregnant again at the time of her death, and the baby in her stomach died. The police were amazed by the brutality of the murder. Now they had to find out who could have taken such drastic measures. However, the detectives did not suspect that the investigation would take almost a decade. After examining the crime scene, the body was taken to the forensic laboratory. According to the autopsy report, the deceased received 3 deep stab wounds. One of them was located on her left arm and clearly bore signs of defensive actions. The attacker severed an artery that caused heavy bleeding. Janet was losing blood so fast that she was unconscious within seconds. As a rule, with such injuries, the victim dies in a matter of minutes. Given the relatively small number of blows inflicted, the medical examiner was unable to determine their order. The expert also could not give the exact time of death. The fact is that the temperature in the room where the crime was committed was quite low, which could slow down this process. There were plenty of forensic evidence at the crime scene and on the victim's body, but all the materials needed to be thoroughly examined. At the same time, the police were looking for witnesses who could point to the likely perpetrator. The first person on the list of suspects immediately got the husband of the deceased, Janet Abaroa, who was repeatedly invited for interrogations. Based on his testimony, it was possible to reconstruct part of the events that preceded the brutal murder. According to him, on April 26, 2005, the man was with his wife until 7 p.m. Then Janet went to bed, and Raven left the house to play a mini-football match. Raven didn't get home until 10:40 p.m. His wife did not answer when he called her, so the man went up to the room on the top floor. Opening the door, he saw his wife standing in an unnatural position on her knees. According to Raven, she periodically used this pose. She knelt with her head on the floor, did not move and did not respond. Then Raven turned on the light and saw that the whole floor was covered in blood. He turned his wife on her side and realized that she was dead. Before Raven's arrival, the police began to find out from the man who, in his opinion, could be behind this crime, and he put forward an unexpected theory. According to Raven, there have been great financial difficulties in the family lately. He suggested that against this background, his wife simply could not stand it and took her own life. The relatives and friends of the deceased perceived this as an absolute lie. They knew everything about Janet and were one of the few people with whom she calmly communicated and shared her pain. However, she has never voiced anything like this. Besides, the woman was very religious and would never have done such an act. However, by this point, the detectives were already sure that there could be no voluntary death here. The woman received injuries that could not be inflicted on herself. In addition, there was clearly evidence indicating that someone else was in the house at the time of the massacre besides Janet and the child. A bloody shoe print was found next to the body, as well as a fingerprint. Neither the windows nor the doors were forced. This means that the victim voluntarily let the criminal into the house, or he entered there on his own. In any case, it was someone close to him who had access to the house. There were no signs of a struggle, except that one of the stab wounds was on the arm, which is typical for an attempt to close from a blow. Nothing was missing from the house except Raven's laptop and a couple of knives in the kitchen. Probably one of them was used for violence, while the attacker did not touch other valuables. At that time, there was still no evidence against Raven, so the detectives had to let him go. But they continued to watch him. After the incident, Raven packed up his things just a few days later, took his son and left for Utah. It might seem that the man could not stay in the house where the tragedy occurred and went to where his whole family lived. However, later his friends of the victim, whom he met after the murder, admitted that he did not behave like a person who had lost a loved one. It felt like he didn't care what happened to his wife and wasn't at all interested in who did it. Investigators noted that from the very beginning of the investigation, Raven was reluctant to cooperate and then simply ignored any requests. Finally, the police had a motive when they found out that after the onset of the second pregnancy, shortly before the crime, Raven had issued Janet's life insurance policy for the tidy sum of $500,000. It seemed strange to the police, because the family had serious financial problems and they had not previously issued these insurance. There wasn't enough money for the most important things, but Raven found the means to pay insurance premiums. In addition, it turned out that the husband contacted the insurance company to receive payment immediately after the attack. Even before the deceased was buried, it all looked suspicious. Clouds were gathering over the widower. Trying to figure out who Raven was, the police quickly came to the conclusion that from the very beginning of his relationship with Janet, he was dishonest. He told her that he was a Mormon devotee and had even made a missionary trip to Peru. However, it was all a lie. During this period, the young widower lived in Salt Lake City, Utah. After receiving an insurance payment and raising his child, here the man met and immediately began dating a new woman named Vanessa Pont. Their romance developed rapidly. They saw each other often and quickly found a common language. Vanessa was also a single mother. Over the past 5 years, she has despaired of finding love and was going to devote her whole life only to the child. But Raven was different from other men in his friendly nature. He was persistent and knew how to attract attention. Vanessa quickly fell in love with him, surrounding her with lies. The man immediately ingratiated himself into her confidence and confessed to his new girlfriend that his wife had died in a car accident. He said this not only to Vanessa, but to everyone around him. Janet's family, upon learning about this, began to closely monitor their former son-in-law, in the hope that they would be able to find evidence of his massacre of Janet. At first, Vanessa trusted him completely. But her curiosity about Janet's fate did not leave her, and soon the woman found out that Janet was the victim of an unsolved murder. However, Raven once again managed to deceive his new lover. She later said, "I immediately felt so sorry for him. He said there was an intruder, that she was murdered, and that he left everything as it is." After about a month of dating, Raven proposed to Vanessa. To make a good impression, they went to the house where Vanessa's parents lived to receive a blessing. The woman's father was a policeman. He immediately had a bad feeling about it. He said, "The Christian part of me wants to believe that he is innocent. However, the police department says that there is something wrong with this case." In the end, Vanessa's parents decided that if she was happy, then they were happy and allowed her to marry Raven. Immediately after the wedding, the couple went to Las Vegas for their honeymoon. where Raven showed Vanessa his true identity. Raven started by insulting his new wife, and later he began to physically abuse her. Raven was hitting her, throwing her against the walls, and then he tried to get her drunk with illegal substances and convince her that she had stumbled. When that didn't work, he started calling her mom and friends and telling them that Vanessa had terrible depression and bipolar disorder, that she should be placed in a psychiatric hospital. He was slowly creating a picture that Vanessa was mentally ill. When Janet's family found out that Raven had remarried, they tried to contact Vanessa to warn her of the danger and advised her to stay away from him. 4 months after the wedding, Vanessa filed for divorce. Meanwhile, a North Carolina police officer decided to convince Raven to talk to the police again. He was at the crime scene 4 years ago and had no doubt that Raven was guilty. In his testimony, Raven began to get confused about the details. He started adding new stories or forgot to mention what he had said earlier. The boot print found did not match the shoes used by the main suspect that evening. In addition, the officers carefully checked the recording of the conversation with the dispatcher of the rescue service, which Raven called. One of the main mistakes was that the man called the stab wounds gunshot wounds, although it was obvious. He claimed that his laptop was stolen during the attack, but a few hours before the alleged theft, he had backed up his files on external drives. However, there were not enough materials against the suspect. All of them were indirect, so the investigators continued to collect evidence for the trial. They carefully examined the photos from the crime scene and the victim's body. At the moment when the police arrived at the house, the new detective noticed that an empty lens case lay open on the table next to the bed. This meant that they could have been on Janet at the time of the crime. However, the parents of the deceased claimed that she never went to sleep in them. Janet took them off in strict order before going to bed. But Raven told police officers that when he left for a football match, his wife was already in bed and sleeping with the child, which means she had to take off her lenses. Could this mean that she was killed before she got into bed and before he left? Unfortunately, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy did not pay attention to whether there were contact lenses on the victim's eyes. This was not done on purpose. Often criminologists do not pay attention to some small things because they do not play a role in investigations. However, in this situation, they could be the key proof of Janet Abaroa's lies. To confirm or refute this guess, an exhumation of the body was necessary. Janet's family readily agreed, as they desperately wanted to prove the culprit's guilt and achieve justice for the deceased. In July 2010, the body was exhumed. The medical examiners actually found something similar to the remains of contact lenses on the eyes. After the examination, they managed to prove this fact. Numbers belonging to AccuView were found on the contact lenses. Despite the fact that the material had dried and deformed, an official examination was necessary to convince the jury. First of all, it was necessary to make sure that the contact lenses were able to be preserved, and it really was them. To do this, a large-scale experiment was conducted, which took a whole year. The specialist used pig's eyes, on which contact lenses were installed. They then underwent an embalming procedure identical to that through which human bodies pass before burial. As a result of the experiment, it was possible to confirm all the guesses, which means that Janet was really wearing lenses at the time of the murder. Therefore, I did not go to bed. All this was confirmed by the lies of the main suspect.
Lens case is open. I said to myself, well, if she's ready to go to bed, and she still has her contacts in, that's unusual.
The trial of Janet Abaroa began in 2013. This case caused a wide public outcry, so it was actively covered by the media. It attracted the attention of dozens of people who wanted to be present in the courtroom. The jury was provided with comprehensive information about what happened. The prosecutor's office stated before the start of the trial that it considers the husband of the murdered woman to be guaranteed guilty of the crime. However, there was no direct evidence against the defendant, so the whole case was built on circumstantial evidence. This was to the advantage of Ravan's defense. At the same time, there were so many materials that it definitely had to convince the jury of the defendant's guilt. According to the testimony of relatives and friends of the deceased, just a month before her death, she complained about problems with her husband. According to her, her husband had serious anger issues. He lost his temper too easily and literally lost control. She repeatedly stated that she was afraid of him and was going to leave him. The victim's mother claimed that she had repeatedly witnessed heated arguments, which the spouses often entered into. but she had never seen her son-in-law use physical violence. When communicating with the police, Raven admitted that they had repeatedly had disputes with his wife, but the man categorically denied his guilt. During opening statements at the trial, the defense focused the jury's attention on the fact that investigators initially focused all their attention on the evidence of Janet's husband's guilt. They didn't deal with other likely suspects. During the trial, several women testified that they had intimate relations with Raven during his marriage. Among them was a girl who was underage at the time. She stated that she felt pressure that forced her to have sexual intercourse with him, and that she became more and more afraid around him. Another mistress said that he was quite meticulous and calculating. This could indicate that he had carefully planned the murder, and could indeed successfully mislead the police. Once Raven forced her to have sex in a car literally on the side of the road. He behaved quite aggressively, so the mistress had to obey. She even left a lock of her hair in the car in case something happened to her. All this had to have a good reason. Not every girl goes on a date and intentionally leaves her DNA samples in her boyfriend's car so that these traces can prove his involvement in something bad. She clearly feared for her life, which she told the jury. At the end of the trial, the prosecutor stated that one of the potential motives for the murder was Janet's unplanned pregnancy. She told only those closest to her, including several sisters. Janet was so happy to continue motherhood, but clearly considered her husband not the best father for children. This news, given their difficult financial situation, could have angered Rain, the prosecution believed. During the investigation, another obvious lie on the part of the defendant was revealed. Raven stuck to his story that he found his wife already dead when he talked to the police. However, in confession at a local church, the man confessed that when he found his wife, she was still alive and even tried to talk to him, but immediately lost consciousness and died. The defense filed an application for a mistrial because the characters of the defendant's victim were not fully reflected, and this request was granted. The next stage of the trial was scheduled for March 2014. By this point, Raven had made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of his wife. On this basis, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison with the right to parole after 8 years. At the same time, 4 years were immediately counted, which he had already spent in prison while awaiting sentencing. Janet's family received custody of her son. The killer was released from prison on Christmas Day 2017. At that moment, he turned 39 years old. The man returned to Utah and lives there to this day. Such a verdict, of course, shocked the victim's family. They were outraged by this injustice. Janet won't get anything back, and her monster husband continues to live life to the fullest. However, the family remains content with the fact that they managed to achieve at least such minimal justice.